Good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to wait a few moments to make sure everyone can get connected before we get started and pick up with policy statements. All right, I'll go ahead and reorient us. Good afternoon. It is 1:02 p.m. It is still August 19th, 2024. I'm Nicole Kinsey, the presiding hearing officer for the Administrative Hearings Office of the State Water Resources Control Board. This is the afternoon portion of the first day of hearing on the pending petitions and associated water right application for the proposed Sites Reservoir project filed by Sites Project Authority. And we convened initially in person and then reconvened by Zoom after technical difficulties at 11 o'clock and started in with policy statements. We are about halfway through by my estimate. My intent is to pick up with policy statements and hear from all of you, and then turn back to some of the procedural issues that may be outstanding to the extent that we need to address those before the evidentiary hearing starts later in August. And with that, I will turn to the room. Next on my list for policy statements is the Los Angeles County Business Federation. I have Sarah Wilfong or Chris Wilson. And excuse me while I change my view so I can see the room here. Do I have a representative from the Los Angeles County Business Federation? All right, I will move on to Coachella Valley Water District. Robert Chang.
Good afternoon, hearing officer
Good
Kinsey and
afternoon.
board members. Hopefully you can hear me okay.
Yes, thank you very much.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Robert Chang, Cheng. I am the Assistant General Manager for Coachella Valley Water District, located down in the southeastern part of our beautiful state. And I'm here to provide a statement of support for Sites Reservoir on behalf of our organization. We were created in 1918 to actively manage water resources within our 1,000 square mile area. And we supply drinking water to 270,000 residents and irrigation water to over 65,000 acres of some of the most productive farmland in the U.S. These imported water supplies drive a multi-billion-dollar economy that generates over 65,000 jobs, all on less than 5 inches of rain a year. This task has become increasingly more difficult over the last decades in light of decreased imported water reliability, increased growth, regulatory pressures, and increased demand for ever-shrinking supply. Even before the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act became a requirement, a cornerstone of our long-term water management strategy was to ensure that we replenish as much water to our groundwater basin as we extracted. To do so, Coachella Valley Water District makes use of all of our available supplies. We fully recognize the importance of conservation of recycled water, and they're very important tools in our portfolio. But imported waters such as the Colorado River and state water project supplies remain the most valuable resources available, supplies that we secured with great effort and cost. This organization made the decision to participate in Sites Reservoir project back in 2016 because of the promise to add new storage as a way for us to help manage the increased flashiness in hydrology while providing a pathway to deal with the more stringent environmental water quality regulations. The 1.5 million acre feet of new storage enabled by Sites Reservoir north of the Delta provides CVWD and our partners a much needed tool to survive poor allocation years on both the federal and state water projects. Our import water supplies are under stress as never seen before. The once dependable Colorado River has suffered the impacts of decades-long drought, which has reduced storage levels to historic lows and challenged the ability of the system to meet contractual delivery obligations. Recognizing the importance of being part of the solution, we are participating in voluntary reductions up to 45,000 acre feet a year from now until 2026 to help save up to 3 million acre feet of Colorado River water to meet the demands of the 40 million users who rely on the system. Our board's decision to contribute to the solution was made when the state water project supply was suffering from successive years of 5% allocation. Our conservation of Colorado River water will extend well past the next few years. As we negotiate the next set of operating guidelines that will likely extend until 2045, CVWD and our California partners have indicated willingness to make long-term reductions, but we cannot do so without a plan to replace all or a portion of the water from another source. The site's reservoir, in addition to all the other benefits that have been heard before, is a part of this solution. Our statewide water supply, and ultimately the security of all our communities and the strength of our economy, depends on California's ability to reliably deliver water throughout our state. For these reasons, CVWD strongly supports and urges the board to consider approval of the site's reservoir project. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Chang. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. I appreciate it. Associations of Bay Area Governments. I have Belia Ramos. Good afternoon. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Madam Hearing Officer Kenzie and Board Member Diadamo. Thank you for this opportunity to provide testimony in support of the site's reservoir project. My name is Belia Ramos, and I serve both as the District 5 Supervisor in Napa County and as the President of the Association of Bay Area Governments. My comments are my own individual comments. The ABAG is the Council of Governments. It's comprised of the 9 Bay Area counties and 101 cities. It is the agency statutorily required to plan for new housing in the Bay Area. And we know that the housing crisis is absolutely crippling in the Bay Area. As outlined by the Regional Housing Needs Allocation, during ABAG's 6th cycle of Reno, we had to plan in 2022 for a total housing allocation of 441,176 units in these 9 counties and 101 cities. I want to, at this time, say that I support, and a lot of what I will say is going to be the same as the comments previously made earlier today by Adrian Covert of the Bay Area Council. I want to thank you for this opportunity to listen to the critical role that the site's reservoir is going to play into supporting ABAG's RENA allocations. That's our regional housing needs. Housing insecurity in California stems from a lack of housing supply. And in order for us to be able to plan and to actually build the housing that the state of California is asking all our local jurisdictions to deliver upon, we need to make sure that we have a reliable water source. And that is only going to come from a new source. Availability of water is a key factor in the production of new housing. Recent climate conditions and droughts create yearly fluctuations in water allocations. And in fact, when we dealt with our 6th cycle of housing allocations, one of the critical hurdles for jurisdictions to overcome was having water to be able to plan for their housing. And this unpredictability in our housing and in the water that serves our housing needs to be addressed so that we can continue to plan and produce the new housing to create a more affordable, not just Bay Area region, but also California. The site's reservoir project enhances jurisdictions' ability to manage water resources effectively, and it's going to be directly supporting housing production. I want to make sure that I point out that Zone 7's water agency, Valley Water, and the City of American Canyon are both participants in the site's reservoir project and are planned to provide water to the jurisdictions, which are tasked with producing 40% of those housing units that I previously mentioned in that 6th housing cycle. That's nearly 180,000 units that will be benefiting from the site's reservoir project. The benefits of this project are profound for jurisdictions where the stability of water supply is essential for the future growth of these communities. By improving water management and in reducing the impacts of drought-induced fluctuations, the site reservoir project supports a more predictable environment for housing development, enabling these jurisdictions to plan and build with greater confidence, creating sustainable and equitable housing developments across the Bay Area and beyond. In order to progress as a state and move California forward, we must address our housing crisis, and that starts with critical infrastructure. The successful completion of the site's reservoir is imperative to addressing California's housing crisis. I urge the board to continue to move the site's reservoir forward so that California too can move forward. Thank you so much for the opportunity to address you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Ms. Ramos, and thank you for joining us this afternoon. Appreciate it. Michael Lewis with the Construction Industry Coalition on Water Quality.
Good
Mr. Lewis,
afternoon.
good afternoon.
My name is Michael Lewis. I'm the Senior Vice President of the Construction Industry Coalition on Water Quality. And we are an association made up of the Associated General Contractors of California, the Building Industry Association of Southern California, the California Contractors Association, and United Contractors. Collectively, we represent thousands of contractors performing public and private work with several 100,000 employees. For more than 30 years, our organization has advocated on behalf of federal, state, and local issues relating to water quality and to water supply. KICWIC, as we call ourselves, supports a full portfolio of options to maintain this vital resource for businesses and residents of California. We've supported conservation efforts, funding to capture and reuse stormwater, treatment and reuse of wastewater, and strategic investments in the expansion of our existing water supply system. California faces a myriad of challenges from climate change, natural disasters, a shifting population, which is moving to areas where we don't have infrastructure, and an aging water delivery system. The voters of the state have provided consistent and generous support for funding to maintain and operate our water system. The site's reservoir project is a critical piece of that water puzzle and as an important insurance policy for those challenges. The voters have supported funding for this project, and we should implement their policy direction without further delay. Californians have been asked to conserve to a greater degree than anywhere else in the nation, and they have delivered. They've been asked to pay extraordinary prices for potable water. They've been asked repeatedly to provide funding for watershed improvements, for habitat preservation, for wildlife protection, and water conservation programs. And they've supported all of those efforts consistently and financially. All of those policies are sound investments in a comprehensive watershed program. But the voters have also demanded that policymakers provide a full menu of options to assure that the system will be reliable in the face of our complex and unique challenges. We know from experience in Southern California with the Diamond Valley offline reservoir that it protected our region from punishing multi-year drought because it was ready and available when it was most needed. Site's reservoir will play the same important role for Central and Southern California as our water supply becomes more fragile. So KICWIC urges you to take all the necessary steps to authorize the permits for this critical water supply project to proceed to construction and to operation. And we did submit the written comments as well. So thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, Mr. Lewis. Thank you for taking the time to join us today. Mr. Wilson, you are ahead of the game. Charles Wilson with Southern California Water Coalition. Welcome. Please go ahead.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon, and Chair Esquivel, members of the board. My name is Charles Wilson. I serve as the Executive Director of the Southern California Water Coalition. I'm here today to express our strong support for the site's reservoir project, a critical infrastructure initiative that promises to enhance water security for all Californians. With all the talk about ChatGPT and artificial intelligence these days, I thought I'd ask AI to explain the benefits of site's reservoir to me. I got a very interesting response, which I'm going to share with you today. And as the story goes, ChatGPT told me how best to explain sites in this way. Imagine you're at a party and there's a huge bowl of punch. Everyone's drinking from it, but no one is refilling it. That's California's water situation. We're all sipping from the same bowl and nobody's adding more punch. Pretty soon, we're just swishing around fruit slices and pulpy concentrate. Not very satisfying. Enter the site's reservoir. It's like having a secret stash of punch hidden away when the bowl runs dry. This reservoir will capture stormwater and excess runoff during those California rainy seasons when Mother Nature decides to be generous. It'll store all that water so we can use it during California's usual 11.5-month drought. think of it as an ultimate rainy day fund. Now, I find that kind of interesting, and it works, doesn't it? It might be true what they say that AI is going to dramatically change the workplace and some jobs, especially writers' jobs, apparently. But until AI can send holograms here to testify, this face for radio at least still has a job. So, on a most serious note, California needs Sites Reservoir. It will substantially increase our water storage capacity, play a crucial role in supporting the health of our ecosystems, and support economic growth and stability. Sites Reservoir is not just about securing water for today, but also about planning for the future. By investing in the Sites Reservoir, we are taking a proactive step to address the long-term water challenges that our state is facing due to climate change impacts. And I know you understand the benefits and all the volumes and volumes of data that you have combed through these various proceedings. And what I want to leave you with today is that this point of this project is supported by water agencies, cities, counties, businesses, labor groups, agricultural interests, social justice organizations, among many others, the 200 members of the Southern California Water Coalition. Even though none of us are direct beneficiaries of this reservoir, we understand the importance of building storage along with this highly integrated and interconnected system. So I'd like to thank you for your time today. And after today's technical frustration, a special shout out to you, Nicole, and to the members of the board who have done such a fabulous job keeping the wheels on the train and keeping us moving. But I'm going to go back to my AI this afternoon, just in your name. And I'm going to ask for it to find me a party at 5 o'clock with Run Really Big Punch Bowl. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Mr. Wilson. I appreciate your statement, and thank you for joining us virtually today. Appreciate it. Eastern Municipal Water District, Mr. Cornejo Reynoso, please.
Thank you, and good afternoon, members of the State Water Board, Presiding Officer Kenzie. My name is Pacal Cornejo Reynoso, and I'm the Policy and Government Affairs Manager for Eastern Municipal Water District. We greatly appreciate the opportunity to provide our policy statement today. So EMWD is the water, wastewater, and recycled water provider to nearly 1 million residents in Western Riverside County and Northern San Diego County. And over several decades, we've made significant investments in bolstering our local water supplies for the benefit of both our urban and agricultural customers. And this portfolio includes 3 brackish groundwater desalination facilities, robust groundwater banking initiatives, and a leading class recycled water program. As others on the call have noted, we've also benefited from having Diamond Valley Lake situated right in our backyard, which is really just a lifeline during the last drought. So despite all these local supplies, EMWD will always be reliant in some part on imported water sources from the Bay Delta. And that's especially true because the population within our service area is growing faster than anywhere else in the state of California. So for these reasons and others which are more thoroughly outlined in the written policy statement that we submitted, we're very pleased to support the Site Project Authority's petition for water rights. EMWD will primarily benefit from supplies stored in sites through imported water from our wholesale provider, the Metropolitan Water District of Southern California. However, EMWD has also joined the waitlist of agencies to convey our interest in actively participating in the sites project should water resources become available in that reservoir in the future. As an off-stream reservoir, the sites project will simultaneously provide water supply benefits and environmental protections. And by creating a storage supply of 1.5 million acre feet that can be utilized during times of drought, sites will reduce the stress on California's rivers and reservoir systems, which have been exacerbated by climate change. The water stored in sites will help meet the needs of fish and migratory bird species, and federal and state natural resource agencies will be able to use the dedicated environmental water stored in the reservoir to support ecosystems when other water supplies aren't as plentiful or reliable. As climate whiplash and acidification continue to impact California's water supply, additional storage is essential, and it's critical that the State Water Board take the actions to ensure that Sites Reservoir can advance. This project provides a multitude of benefits to residents across the state, and we hope that you will consider the approval of the requested water rights. Thank you all for your time today.
Thank you very much, Mr. Cornejo Reynoso. I appreciate you joining us this afternoon. Next, I have Orange County Business Council, Mr. Boutros. Please go ahead.
Thank you. Hello and good afternoon, members of the board. My name is George Boutros, and I'm the Government Affairs Manager here at Orange County Business Council, or OCBC for short. OCBC is the leading voice of business here in Orange County, and we appreciate the opportunity to provide our comments to the State Water Resources Control Board today in support of the Sites Water Project Authority's application. Our organization has submitted a written policy statement as well, but for the sake of time, I would like to just summarize some of the key points. OCBC is in strong support of adequate investment in water across the board, such as surface water improvements, water recycling and reuse projects, groundwater cleanup, and water storage systems that protect California from droughts, earthquakes, and other events that would otherwise cause significant economic dislocations, loss of human lives, or loss of significant natural resources. This includes the project that's set before you today. Additionally, our organization has been in support of legislation throughout this legislative cycle that complements the Sites Reservoir project. Among many other reasons that are outlined in our written policy statement, there are a few of the these are a few of the core reasons why OCBC is in support of the Sites Reservoir project. We'd like to encourage you to take action necessary to move this incredibly vital project forward. So on behalf of OCBC, I'd like to thank you again for your time and consideration in this matter and for the opportunity to be here to speak before you today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Boutros, and thank you for joining us. Mr. Lambros from Secure Water Alliance, please go ahead.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Hearing Officer Kenzie and members of the State Water Board. My name is Rich Lambros. I'm the Executive Director of the Secure Water Alliance. I'm here today to speak in support of the Sites Project Authority's application that is before you. Our group represents businesses, contractors, labor unions, and local citizens who support access to safe, clean, reliable, and affordable water for all our communities. We believe our state's best safeguards against a changing climate and California's constant flood, drought uncertainties is to study, approve, and build new smart water projects so that in wet years, we can capture more water and limit flooding, and in dry years, we can avoid the water shortages, costly rate increases, and water uncertainties that negatively impact jobs, our local economy, and the quality of life. That is why we support the Sites Reservoir project and encourage you to take the positive action that is necessary to move this vital and environmentally sensitive project forward. The addition of 1.5 million acre feet of new offline storage capacity certainly makes sense as we struggle to adapt our state's outdated water system to the extended dry cycles and higher temperatures that will come with climate change. And by expanding storage, we will help to keep water bills and the cost of food lower, which will benefit so many in California, a state that unfortunately has the nation's largest population of people living in poverty. The Secure Water Alliance is a Southern California group, so we know very well the benefits of having an asset like Sites Reservoir. Our own offline reservoir, the Metropolitan Water District's Diamond Valley Lake, proved its worth in the last extended drought. Were it not for the 800,000 acre feet of metropolitan water that had been stored there in preparation for future drought conditions, even the dramatically successful conservation measures undertaken throughout our region would not have freed up enough water to meet demand. Job losses, greater water rate increases, and innumerable other difficulties were avoided. Diamond Valley did that without damming any rivers or obstructing the migration of any fish species, just as Sites Reservoir will when it is built and adds nearly twice as much new storage capacity to our system. Both Northern and Southern California need the Sites Reservoir. To combat climate change and keep water rates affordable, we must capture and store more of the great abundance of water that becomes available to us during wet years and during the increasing number of atmospheric rivers that now inundate the state. The Sites Reservoir project is an example of good planning, environmental sensitivity, and the adoption of positive forward-looking strategies to meet the future water needs. It deserves your support. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lambros. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. Southern California District of Laborers. I have Ralph Velador or Josh Lafarga, or possibly both. Do I have any representative from the Southern California District of Laborers? Next on my list, I have Irvine Ranch Water District, Paul Weghorst. Please go ahead.
Good afternoon. I am Paul Weghorst, the Executive Director of Water Policy at Irvine Ranch Water District in Southern California. We are a south of the Delta participant in the Sites Reservoir project. Thank you very much for the opportunity to share the statement today and in support of the Sites Reservoir project. IRWD is the 9th largest retail agency in California, serving approximately 450,000 residents in Central Orange County. Our primary sources of supply are groundwater and imports from the State Water Project, as well as the Colorado River. We are recognized throughout the state for our water use efficiency and recycled water programs, as well as our innovative groundwater banking projects in Kern County, where we recharge and store wet year supplies. We use this water for use in an emergency. The Sites Reservoir project will provide 1.5 million acre-feet of off-stream storage to capture water otherwise lost to the ocean. The project involves an unparalleled partnership between the state of California and municipal and agricultural water districts located throughout the state of California. The Bureau of Reclamation is also a very major partner in the project. The project is designed to improve fish habitat and strengthen water resilience, the water resilience of agriculture and urban communities across the state. Project participants will receive much needed supplies with improved water supply reliability, all in spite of climate change. Sites Reservoir is being planned with state-of-the-art hydrologic and environmental expertise, and it will be built and operated based on beneficiary pays principles. As a participant in the Sites project, IRWD will receive a cost-effective supply of water. We plan to integrate our participation in the Sites project with operations of the Kern Fan Groundwater Storage Project, another important Prop 1 funded project that is being developed in Kern County. IRWD is a partner in the Kern Fan project with Rosedale Rio Bravo Water Storage District, the state of California, as well as the Bureau of Reclamation. Every year, IRWD will schedule the delivery of Sites water to the Kern Fan project for groundwater recharge and storage, thereby enhancing IRWD's emergency supplies bank south of the Delta. IRWD will recover and use these bank supplies in its service area during major droughts and supply interruptions, such as a highly probable earthquake-induced Delta levee failure event. The integration of surface and groundwater supplies is an important strategy for improving the resiliency and sustainability of California's water supplies, and IRWD is working to make that happen. IRWD's use of its capacity in Sites Reservoir to develop an emergency supply is only one of the many compelling benefits for Sites Reservoir, and we've heard many of them today. For IRWD and other south of the Delta participants in the Sites Reservoir projects, deliveries will typically occur in the fall using existing Delta facilities without impacts to fish populations. The benefits of these deliveries will include the use of existing state water project facilities, which will allow spreading existing fixed cost over much more water, an element of affordability. Sites Reservoir will also help mitigate declining Colorado River supplies in future reductions from the state project. The Southern California Sites Reservoir for Southern California, the Sites Reservoir project is a cost-effective and operationally flexible alternative to other much more energy-intensive and impactful projects such as ocean desalination. California's participation in the Sites Reservoir project will result in significant storage and releases dedicated to fish and associated habitat. These releases will increase freshwater flows to the Delta during dry periods. With the Sites Reservoir project, extraordinary opportunities will exist to expand the use of existing facilities and for exchanges of water that will improve operations of the state and federal projects, all resulting in reduced impacts to the environment. In summary, IRWD and its customers will benefit from Sites Reservoir with a significant supply of water to be used in an emergency. California will benefit from a more resilient and reliable water systems that will support the state's environment, the economy, and residents for generations to come. Accordingly, IRWD recommends the approval of the water right permit applications for Sites Reservoir. Thank you for the opportunity to speak today.
Thank you, Mr. Weghorst, and thank you for joining us this afternoon. Santa Clara Valley Water District, Martin Redasevich.
Good afternoon.
Thank you.
Martin
Good
Rada-
afternoon.
Martin Radosevich, representing Santa Clara Valley Water District, also known as Valley Water, speaking in support of the Sites Reservoir project. Our agency is the regional wholesale water supplier for 2 million people and thousands of job-creating businesses in Santa Clara County. Our water supplies also include, local surface water and groundwater, as well as recycled water and imported water. It's the only water agency in the state that's both a state and federal water contractor as well, with 50% of our county's water supply being imported from outside our region. Valley Water is a participant in the Sites Reservoir project because it would provide new, climate-resilient, and cost-efficient source of dry-year water supply to meet a portion of our future water supply needs. As we're all well aware, climate change is expected to reduce the California snowpack by as much as 48 to 65% by the end of the century, which would effectively reduce our capacity. At the same time, climate change is predicted to intensify winter storms, resulting in more heavy rainfall. Sites Reservoir provides rain-fed storage solution designed to adapt to future climate conditions by capturing high flows during winter storms, which can't be stored with current infrastructure. The Sites Reservoir would be operated in coordination with State Water Project and the CVP, creating flexibility to help the state and federal water managers adapt to changing conditions and improving the management of California's water supply during extreme flooding and drought. Additionally, providing water supply for cities, industry, and farms, the Sites project would also provide new water supply for the environment. As currently envisioned, the reservoir would provide approximately 370,000 acre-feet of storage dedicated to the water in the environment and making the environment the single largest user of water for Sites Reservoir. A recent report by the California Department of Water Resources said that without any climate adaptation measures, the State Water Project could be reduced on average by 13 to 22% by 2043. Climate change would likely result in similar reductions to our future CVP allocations as well. Our participation in the Sites Reservoir project is part of a portfolio of climate-resilient water supply solutions, which include expanding local storage, more stormwater capture, potable reuse and recycled water, and increasing groundwater banking. California needs the Sites Reservoir project for cities, industry, and farms, and the environment, so we urge you to approve the water rights petition for this unique multi-benefit project. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Radasevich. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. I appreciate it. Robert Kuhn, Wheeler Ridge, Maricopa Water Storage District. Please.
Good afternoon, Officer Quincy and Water Board Member McGuire. My name is Robert Kunde, Kunde. You were close, Officer.
My pronunciation was off. I pronounced
That's
the E.
okay.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Kunde.
Thank you. I'm a registered agricultural engineer in California. I have 41 years of experience in managing agricultural water supplies, and I'm here today representing Wheeler Ridge Maricopa Water Storage District, hereafter Wheeler Ridge, to speak in support of the Sites Reservoir project. Wheeler Ridge is located at the south end of the San Joaquin Valley near Bakersfield in a critically overdrafted groundwater basin. Wheeler Ridge provides irrigation water to about 78,000 acres of cropland and manages the groundwater basin underlying 149,000 acres within its boundaries, and has been a funding participant in the Sites project since 2016. You've heard from others today regarding the benefits of Sites for critically needed drought water supply for fisheries and wildlife, so I will not repeat those points. They are included in my written policy statement. My remarks today are a summary version of that statement. We'll focus on the Sites benefits for agricultural water supply, groundwater sustainability, and growing food within Wheeler Ridge and the San Joaquin Valley. Crops grown by farmers within Wheeler Ridge that would benefit from Sites water are oranges, table grapes, almonds, pistachios, and seedlings for planting. These are permanent crops that need water in all years, including drought years. The availability of Sites water in drought years will stabilize these farmers' drought year water supplies for continued food production for the benefit of people who eat food throughout California, the nation, and the world. The key point is that Sites will further the fundamental value of growing food in the San Joaquin and Sacramento valleys to feed people. This would be a good thing to appreciate and celebrate. In Wheeler Ridge, drought years present the danger of groundwater levels falling below critical thresholds for harm as identified in Sustainable Groundwater Management Act groundwater management plans. A key point is that sites water can be a small part of avoiding critical thresholds by reducing reliance on groundwater and groundwater banking projects in drought years. Sites water also provides some opportunity to recharge groundwater banking projects in non-drought years, which will help raise groundwater levels. Drought years are particularly hard for farm workers who experience job loss due to reduced irrigation supplies and crop production. A key point is that sites drought year water will lessen such loss for farm workers residing in nearby Kern County disadvantaged communities of Mettler, Arvin, Lamont, Taft, and Maricopa. The primary water supply for Wheeler Ridge is obtained through the State Water Project. In most years through 2007, Wheeler Ridge received sufficient state project supplies to meet crop demands and correct groundwater overdraft. And since the 1991 drought, Wheeler Ridge has broadened its water supply portfolio to include local groundwater wells, groundwater banking projects, short and long-term water purchases, and funding to improve on-farm water efficiency. Since 2007, when state and federal regulatory restrictions on state project delta diversions dramatically lowered state project supplies, Wheeler Ridge has gone from a state of successful correction of groundwater overdraft to a net lowering of groundwater levels necessary to replace those reduced state project supplies. So a key point is that sites water will lessen the need for drought year water supplies that would otherwise come from groundwater banking projects, or expensive water purchases from others, and will increase the diversity and resiliency of Wheeler Ridge water supplies. California is now in an era when our existing and future water supply security require an all of the above approach. And a key point is that sites will be a necessary part of such an approach. In my written policy statement, I rebut the contentions of some that sites water would be unaffordable for agriculture. Please refer to that statement for further details. But in summary, farmers often purchase expensive drought year water at market rates driven by scarcity. In many cases, such rates have been higher than the projected cost of sites water. Farmers can usually meet much of their drought year crop demands from existing lower cost supplies, such as groundwater. Sites water, therefore, is not needed to meet an entire year of crop demand, but is just an increment of demand to ensure crop survival and or yield. The key point is that when the cost of an incremental quantity of sites water is melded with lower cost supplies, sites water is affordable for agriculture in drought years when it is part of a diverse water supply portfolio. The State Water Resources Control Board should act with urgency with respect to the sites water right application. Please approve this water right for this important project without further delay in the existing schedule. And thank you for your time today.
Thank you, Mr. Cundy. Thank you for your time and joining us this afternoon. Reclamation District 108, Jordan Navarrete. Do I have a representative of Reclamation District 108? And then finally on my list, I have Dr. Glenn Holstein. Is Dr. Holstein with us? With that, I'll look to the room. We have not received any additional email requests from speakers, but is there anyone on the Zoom call who intends to give a policy statement and has not yet had the chance to do so? If you would please unmute your microphone and let me know.
Hi, this is Michael Heather with the City of Fairfield.
Mr. Heather, please go ahead if you would like to speak.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Chair Esquivel, Water Board members, and Hearing Officer Kinsey. I'm Michael Heather, the Assistant Public Works Director with the City of Fairfield. We are a municipally owned utility. On behalf of Fairfield, we appreciate the board's willingness to hold these public hearings to hear the merits of Sites Reservoir and the benefits of adding more water storage to the state's supply portfolio. It is the City of Fairfield's position that Sites Reservoir will help provide a resilient and reliable water supply for California's environmental, urban, and agricultural communities. The City of Fairfield is situated within Solano County, and we are a municipally owned water utility, and currently we have submitted a letter of interest in potentially receiving a small amount of water from the Sites Reservoir project. The primary focus of my comments today are centered on the additional benefits Sites Reservoir could have to the City of Fairfield if we're approved by the Sites Project Authority to receive water from Sites Reservoir. As a retail water purveyor, the city relies solely on surface water sources from both state and federal water projects through contracts with the Solano County Water Agency and Solano Irrigation District. Since the amount of water allocated through the state water project varies every year, Sites Reservoir will help to ensure a more reliable water supply for state water contractors and the City of Fairfield, especially during times of drought. Through the eyes of Fairfield, the addition of Sites Reservoir is not only a key to California's comprehensive water supply strategy, it would potentially help provide additional resiliency to Fairfield's water supply portfolio during periods of critical or dry years. From a local perspective, the Sites Reservoir will not only potentially complement the city's water supply portfolio, but also potentially assist in supporting the local economy in and around the region. The City of Fairfield sees the Sites Reservoir as an opportunity to build regional and state economic security for the next few generations. And in closing, we'd like to thank and recognize the governor for his leadership in advancing these efforts, along with the board for helping to provide a forum for those to speak in support of Sites Reservoir, and urge you to approve this petition for water rights. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Heather. Thank you for joining us. I will look again to the room. Is there anyone else who would like to submit a policy statement today who has not yet had a chance to do so? With that, then I think we will be pivoting for purposes of this afternoon. First, I want to thank all of you who joined us to provide policy statements. Thank you for bearing with us as we dealt with some technical issues this morning. I appreciate your patience, and I'm certainly, it was a very productive morning, and thank you for that. For any of you who are planning to give an in-person statement, I will be providing that opportunity on August 27th when we do plan to reconvene in a hopefully hybrid format in person in the Cal EPA building. We may be in a different, where I believe we are in a different hearing room, the Sierra hearing room, but we will confirm all of that for you so that you know where to go for that opening day. At this point in our proceeding for the day, I'd like to transition to discussion of outstanding procedural issues for the start of our hearing. I had on the agenda the most recent order of proceeding that we issued on Friday was a discussion of some of the testimony submitted by the organizational witnesses. Then we can turn to whether there are outstanding issues about a proposed site visit to be held on September 9th and 10th, and then any other procedural issues. Before we make that shift, first of all, I'd like to give us a few minutes of break because I realize there may be some folks who are in and out of the room, so to speak. For those of you who joined us for policy statements, if you are not planning on participating in this procedural portion of the hearing, you're welcome to join us on YouTube and listen to it on YouTube. We will continue to live stream, but this may be an opportune time to leave the virtual room. And then I will go ahead, I think, after we'll take a brief break and then reconvene, I will go ahead and go through appearances just so I know who is on the call and which parties are represented, and we can pick up with that discussion. So with that, I'm looking at the time, it's 1:45. I know we just had our lunch break, but let's go ahead and reconvene in 5 minutes at 1:50. You don't need to leave the Zoom room. You can just turn off your audio and turn off your video so no one else can hear you if you plan to have a conversation. I'm going to shuffle my papers here, and I will see you back in the virtual room where we'll pick up at 1:50. Thank you very much. All right, welcome everyone. We are reconvened after a very, very short break after hearing policy statements. I did want to add, hopefully those who submitted policy statements are still listening, that if you did submit a written policy statement, I know many of you did, if you submitted a written policy statement, please do, when you have time, check the Sites Reservoir FTP folder that's maintained by the State Water Board. And if you don't have access credentials, send an email to the Sites Reservoir email inbox, and we can provide you those credentials. But the FTP folder for sites is the administrative record. If we don't have your policy statement there, it means something went wrong and we either didn't get it or we misfiled it. So I do want to make sure all of those are in our record. I know you spent time writing them and presenting them today. So please do let us know if you think there are any errors or omissions in that respect. And please let your friends know who may have submitted written policy statements to double check that all of those made it in. As we transition to the procedural portion of our day, again, I appreciate your patience with our technology difficulties this morning. I do want to go through and call appearances, as I mentioned, and then we can jump into the procedural issues. I don't actually have a lot to add on the procedural issues. I mostly wanted to check in with all of you to see what it is that we should talk about that would be productive as we move closer to that evidentiary hearing and then also move closer to our site visit. So it's really an opportunity to hear from all of you. But we'll start with appearances. I'm using the list of parties that I have. If you're representing that entity today, please go ahead and unmute your microphone and state your name. And we'll go through this hopefully fairly quickly. So I will start with the applicant, Sites Project Authority.
Yes, good afternoon, Hearing Officer Kinsey. Andrew Hitchings for Sites Project Authority applicant.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Hitchings. Next, California Department of Water Resources.
Good afternoon, Eric Soderlin, appearing on behalf of the California Department of Water Resources.
Wonderful. Thank you, Mr. Soderlund. And I'll ask my team to add a last name for Mr. Soderlund so our Zoom transcript comes out better. Please. United States Bureau of Reclamation. I know we heard from them earlier. They may not need to join us this afternoon. Let's see. Okay. State Water Contractors.
Good afternoon, Jenna Mandel Rice on behalf of the State Water Contractors.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Central Delta Water Agency et al.
Good afternoon, Dean Reese on behalf of Central Delta, South Delta et al.
Thank you. Good afternoon. County of San Joaquin.
Also for County of San Joaquin.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thanks for that clarification. T&M King Farms, Mr. King.
Good afternoon, Ben King, T&M King Farms. Thank you.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Mr. Clark Ornbaum.
Yes, I'm here, Clark Ornbaum.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Ornbaum. Colusa Indian Community Council. Friends of the River.
Friends of the River is
Scott
represented
Donald
by
Mooney on behalf of Friends of the River.
Oh, I heard from you, Mr. Mooney, on behalf of Friends of the River. And are you representing other parties here today who I should check off?
California Sport Fishing Protection Alliance, Sierra Club, and Save California Salmon.
Thank you. And are there others from Friends of the River who were joining us who want to introduce themselves?
Jan Dorman is on the phone. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And then Mr. Schutz, I see you're also here on behalf of CSPA. You're welcome to introduce yourself.
That's correct. Chris Schutz, California Sport Fishing Protection Alliance.
Thank you. Aqua Alliance. California Water Impact Network. Cal Wild. Fly Fishers of Davis. Northern California Council of Fly Fishers International. Restore the Delta. All right, now I have my second larger group here. I have San Francisco Baykeeper, the Bay Institute, Defenders of Wildlife, and Golden State Salmon Association.
Good afternoon, Eric Busher, San Francisco Baykeeper, Scott Artis, and Ashley Overhouse at Golden State Salmon and Defenders of Wildlife may be joining for part of this afternoon as well.
Thank you very much. Appreciate that. Water Climate Trust, Waterkeeper Alliance, and International Rivers. Winnemem Wintu Tribe. Pacific Coast Federation of Fishermen's Associations, and I have an et al. There's a number of other groups as well. Mr. Spain, I believe I saw you.
Yes, I'm here, and also on behalf of the San Francisco Crab Boat Owners Association, Institute for Fisheries Resources, and North Coast Rivers Alliance.
Thank you very much.
That's the et al.
Yes, thank you. Thank you. Center for Biological Diversity.
Yes, good afternoon. This is John Bessie.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Trout Unlimited. Richard Murat. And Patrick Porgans. Is there anyone else on the call who has not had a chance to introduce themselves? Did I miss any of the parties here? All right, wonderful. Thank you for joining us for this somewhat smaller group to talk about process. In my August 13th procedural ruling, I had identified some evidentiary issues that I wanted to talk about today, having to do with what I called, and hopefully this works, the organizational witnesses, but I meant I believe it was 7 witnesses on behalf of some of the NGOs that submitted testimony that significantly addressed legal standing, but also in some respects addressed matters about the potential impacts from the proposed project and what to do with those witness statements in light of carrying on an efficient proceeding. As I noted, I don't think we need that testimony to establish standing in this proceeding because all of those groups had filed protests, and that's sufficient to participate in this proceeding. And you are, in fact, participating as parties in this proceeding. So in some respects, that's, well, not in some respects, to put it gently, the standing issue is not my problem, although I sympathize with the fact that it may become an issue later in a court proceeding if that were to occur. The other piece of that is how to deal with the relatively small portions of testimony with respect to the impacts of the proposed project. So maybe what I'll do is I'll turn to you. I might politely pick on you, Mr. Mooney, because you represent a number of the parties. I'm not sure if all of them off the top of my head, but a number of the parties. But do you have any comments about the most appropriate path forward to deal with this witness testimony? What is your position with respect to how we can efficiently move forward with these 7 testimonies? I'm trying to find you, Mr. Mooney. You must be somewhere. You were here.
I'm right here.
Okay.
Well, our view is that we need that testimony in there. We understand the administrative ruling with regards to with regards to the standing in terms of this proceeding, but we are creating a record, administrative record, if in case this matter, that also would be the administrative record for if this matter went to court. And we don't want to be in the position, quite frankly, of facing the argument that we didn't establish, there's nothing in the record necessarily establishing our standing in terms of who the groups are and what their interests, specific interests are. I don't want to have to be in a position of having to piece that together, you know, from comments and other direct testimony or cross-examination. So, you know, our thought is that these folks would just essentially affirm their testimony. They don't even really need to give a summary of it, but they would just affirm their testimony. I understand that there are some parts in there that the applicant has objected to the extent they feel a need to cross-examine them on that. I mean, are those folks, those organizational witnesses, would be available for the limited cross-examination on a couple of sentences or a paragraph or two within their testimony. But we think for purposes of legal standing beyond this matter, that it's important that we have that testimony in the record.
Thank you, Mr. Mooney. Are there others who want to, I'm going to turn to you, Mr. Hitchings, but are there others who would like to comment from this perspective in support of the, I'll generally call it in support of these particular witnesses' testimony before I move to Mr. Hitchings?
Yes, if I may, I agree with Mr. Mooney. We understand that for the purposes of this proceeding, we don't need to demonstrate standing as we would in a court of law. But those statements were submitted for that purpose, and it's difficult, if not impossible, as far as I can see, to extricate the statements about impacts from the standing standard, which would require us to show injury in fact. So the statements that are taken as being about the impacts of the project are about the impacts of the project, but they're stated for the purpose of demonstrating injury for the purpose of a standing, if that's helpful.
Thank you, Mr. Bussey. I think I understand the point on that.
Presiding Officer Kinsey, so I would support the statements made by Mr. Busey and Mr. Mooney. I think one thing to point out is that the operations plan itself is totally fluid, and the authority admits that. And so we really don't know how the operations is going to be carried out in full and its impact until it's done. And I think it's important to have the protection for public trust, especially for parties to have standing and ability to litigate this as the operational plans is fully developed.
Thank you, Mr. King. And certainly it is absolutely not my intent to restrict any of these parties who are in this proceeding from fully participating in the proceeding, nor do I have any intent to influence subsequent litigation and who participates in that. But the question is how to do it in a way that's efficient for purposes of this administrative proceeding. And I'm thinking that through. Are there other comments in support of these organizational witnesses before I turn to the applicant? Mr. Hitchings or Mr. Ferguson, do you care to comment on this?
Yeah, thank you, Hearing Officer Kinsey. And Aaron Ferguson is here appearing as well on behalf of the authority. So I just wanted to note that we didn't get a chance in the beginning, but thank you. Yeah, our position is we feel like you captured that well in the procedural ruling, that these are, largely organizational standing statements in the testimony. With some very general statements about potential impacts. We think it's appropriate. You've got the discretion to avoid the undue consumption of time in this hearing to treat them as policy statements. They would still be in the administrative record. They may not be accepted as formal evidence, but they would be in the administrative record, just like the hearing statements or policy statements that we just listened to this morning, and that you have many of them submitted in writing already. So we think it's appropriate to for you to exercise your discretion in that manner. And we do think there are a couple other organizational standing type testimony pieces that we would request that you add to your list for consideration of that. Those would, in addition to the ones that you identified specifically in the procedural ruling, the written testimony of Scott Artist, GSSA 21, which is distinguishable from, I think, GSSA 1, which does have, I would say, substantive testimony in there with regard to project impacts. But GSSA 20 is an organizational standing statement. And also for Ms. Regina Chichazola, Save California Salmon, SCS 1, I would say that that also falls into the organizational standing testimony. One other that isn't formally identified by the protestants as maybe falling into that category, we would argue that also the testimony of Mr. Gary Mulcahy for the Winnemem Wintu, and that's Friends of the River 4. Nearly all of that testimony is historical background or otherwise directed at Shasta Reservoir, the CVP, long-term operations of the two projects, the Trinity River, Delta conveyance issues, and to the extent that there are general statements with regard to project impacts, they are very general, and we would argue they're duplicative of other protestant witnesses' testimony. And so for that same reason, to avoid the undue consumption of hearing time, we would request that you exercise your discretion to treat those as policy statements, but not be part of the evidentiary record.
Officer Kinsey, this is Eric Busher for Baykeeper. The Golden State Salmon Association one, the two declarations from Mr. Artis are part of our protest. Mr. Artis, as I think Mr. Hitchings rightly notes, is going to testify either way about his expert declaration, and provided a summary of that testimony as well. So I don't think there's any real benefit from excluding ahead of time GSSA Exhibit 20. It's going to cover almost all of the same territory that Mr. Artis covers about what his organization is and then what his expert testimony is. That should be addressed at the time of his testimony. I think he's a little bit different because he serves both roles for Golden State Salmon as expert and as their organizational witness.
Thank you, Mr. Busher. Just to make sure I understand your point, because it seems like it could go the other way. I think you just told me that Mr. Artis's testimony would, his cross-examination would cover both, or his testimony would cover both, but it's now I'm confused why there's two sets of testimony, is essentially what I'm coming down to. Why are there two? Why is he submitting two?
There's an expert testimony that he prepared, and then there's the organizational declaration that he prepared.
Okay.
But it's the same witness sponsoring both of those. So he's going to show up and testify regardless of what happens with the Golden State Salmon organizational declaration. So there's no kind of efficiency gained from dealing with that ahead of time. If CITES wants to cross-examine him about the one paragraph in his organizational declaration they object to, he's going to be sitting there on the witness stand anyway.
I understand. Thank you. Thank you for that. Do we have a representative for Save California Salmon? Was that one of yours, Mr. Mooney?
Yes, it is.
Okay. I just wanted to make sure. Do you have any, I don't know if you have, do you have a specific response to Mr. Hitchings' comment with respect to Ms. Chichazola's testimony?
I think it falls within the organizational witnesses, if that's what you're asking.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, I think I don't have any objection to it being part of that. But I disagree that they should be put in as policy statements. I mean, I think they should be part of the evidentiary record. I'm trying to be somewhat overly cautious lawyer here.
Right.
on, avoiding disagreements or disputes down the road, and it's just seeing that they're all addressed here. I mean, if we're not going to probably be citing policy statements as part of the evidence, or in terms of whether or not substantial evidence does or doesn't support, if we ended up in court, supports the project or doesn't support the project. I doubt that they are going to. So I think our testimony with regards to standing should be part of the evidentiary, part of the record.
Thank you, Mr. Mooney. And then I have the same question with respect to Mr. Mulcahy's testimony. It sounds like that is somewhat more extensive, but it has to do with background. Do you have any comments on that, Mr. Mooney? I know I'm asking you on the fly. I recognize that.
Yeah, that's fine. That's fine. I didn't review it specifically for this. I have looked at it previously. But also I'm actually, I know it's got submitted as Friends of the River. But if it's for organizational testimony for the tribe, I don't actually represent the tribe. So I'm a little bit cautious on making representations on behalf of the tribe, but I would think it would just fall in with all the other testimony. And, if they feel a need to cross-examine him on that, then, that's appropriate.
Thank you, Mr. Mooney. I understand and I appreciate the exhibit consolidation of exhibit identification is helpful, but I understand that you don't represent the tribe here. So what I propose to do on this, and I'll look to the room again, but what I'm proposing to do is take another look at this and think about it. We have limited time, as you know. So, but I do understand the cautious lawyer approach. I completely understand that. So no matter what, this testimony is going to be in the record, in the sense of the administrative record. It will be part of, if this matter were to go to litigation, it would be presumably part of the record that the State Water Board would prepare and submit to the court, and identifying as part of the record. The question is whether that ends up being admitted into what we're formally calling the evidentiary record, which is what the board's order could rely on for evidentiary purposes, or whether it's part of the larger administrative record, which is the record of everything that happens in the proceeding. So that's the question here. Mr. Schutz, please go ahead.
Yeah, of course, I don't represent anybody other than CSPA or Mr. Mulcahy, but I reviewed his testimony, and it strikes me as being somewhat more than what some of the other standing kinds of testimony might be. And I think he would be very concerned about having it excluded as an evidentiary statement. I don't think that was the sense, and I don't get the sense that that was the sense in which he prepared it. And I'm unaware of why he's unable to be here this afternoon, but I think that's somewhat different than some of the others.
Thank you, Mr. Schutz. Are there any on this issue, which I'm going to hold? I realize we need some closure on this, but at least these, so you can start thinking about your timing. I know all of this affects your time, and we've allocated that time, so this is important. I would intend to issue a procedural ruling out of this as quickly as possible, ideally early next week. But is there anything else we should talk about with respect to the witness testimony? I guess I'll draw it wide as we proceed closer to August 27th. Mr. Hitchings, please. Or Mr. Ferguson, you both have your hands up. So.
Oh, sorry about that. Yeah, I guess for Mr. Mulcahy, I think it's important to, I wasn't characterizing it. I was very careful not to characterize it as organizational witness testimony. It definitely has more a different type of content in there, but if you do a read through it, you'll see much of it is background and directed at wholly unrelated aspects from the site's reservoir water right application. So I know you said you're going to take another look at it. I just wanted to make it clear that we were not characterizing it as organizational witness testimony, but we still feel like it falls in to that category of should you exercise your discretion to avoid the undue consumption of time in this proceeding. And that's why we identified that as well.
Thank you, Mr. Hitchings, and I appreciate that. I think I had a broad, my invitation to identify other testimony was broad. It wasn't limited necessarily to organizational testimony. So thank you. Mr. Ferguson, did you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I just wanted to add that with respect to concerns about standing for purposes of later litigation, my understanding is the standard is an interested person standard under the Water Code for proceeding with a case. And I'm assuming that the existence of policy statements within the broader administrative record would be more than adequate to make that showing without having to have those as part of the evidentiary record.
Thank you, Mr. Ferguson. One question that could solve this is whether, and I don't know if you're willing to do it, but whether, well, I suppose we don't know who the parties would be in a lawsuit, but what my question was going to be, would you be willing to stipulate to the standing of these particular organizations if there was such a lawsuit? Although I understand that the defendant or respondent in this lawsuit may actually be the State Water Board. So that's a different question.
Actually,
Mr.
Actually,
Moody.
it would be the respondent, and
right.
sites would be the real party in interest. So stipulation would need to come from the state board as well.
Right. That's interesting. Well, let me ask the question, Mr. Ferguson, is that something
the stipulation to that is necessary from the authority in that sort of litigation? I certainly think it's something the authority would consider. The authority had initially reached out to these parties identifying these organizational interest statements and essentially offered to not object to the testimony to the extent these parties would delete or strike the portions that spoke to impacts. So there has been an indication from the authority in the past that there's a willingness to recognize the validity of this testimony for purposes of organizational standing. So, but I say all that, I'm not offering you a conclusive response there, but I just wanted to let you know that the authorities attempted to achieve essentially that same result in the past, but has been met with objection by the parties because of their interest in maintaining the impact statements.
Understood. Thank you, Mr. Ferguson. And I will investigate in an appropriate way internally whether there is a possibility of the State Water Board stipulating to something like this. It's an odd, it's an odd posture, but to the extent we can cut through unnecessary procedures and come to an agreement, I think that makes unnecessary I don't want to say unnecessary testimony, inefficient time. To the extent we can streamline this proceeding, I think that would be a good idea. So that's something I will look into, and we can revisit this issue soon. I realize we need some resolution soon, but I will look into that. Mr. Boucher.
I'm sorry, two last points on this subject. One, given that the procedural ruling that you issued last week, I guess it was, did not flag Mr. Mulcahy's testimony as one that would be potentially subject to an order in this, and that he's not here, it makes at least me uncomfortable not having him have an opportunity to be heard about whether his testimony is going to be admissible or not. And number two, as Mr. Ferguson said, for Baykeeper Exhibit 122, we reached an agreement with that one. So a portion of that they've stipulated to entry.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And I do want to echo, to the extent Mr. Mulcahy's testimony is at issue here and he is not representative and he is not here, that's not something I would rule on without the opportunity to make sure he's aware that that is even in consideration. That's, yes, I completely agree. but I'll take a look at that and then we'll see what next steps are and whether Mr. Mulcahy joins us on August 27th. We may return to this issue. Are there other issues with respect to testimony that we should talk about now?
Hearing officer Ken, we had a couple just points as far as order of testimony and time limit and time estimates, but I don't know if you wanted to get to that or go to the site visit agenda item first.
Why don't we go ahead and talk about that since we're talking about witnesses, and then we can get to the site visit later. So please go ahead.
Okay, great. Thank you. So we just wanted to note, I think you had Dr. Rosenfield, who it's been indicated that he has some scheduling constraints, and Dr. Herbold as well. We are certainly, interested in working with the other parties to accommodate scheduling. I just do want to note, though, that we object to having either of them being kind of taken out of order and put while we're still putting on our direct case in chief. We think it's important that we have the opportunity to put our entire direct case in chief on, including cross and any recross redirect. But we're certainly willing to work with the other parties and those witnesses, counsel to schedule them either appropriately on another date while the protestants are putting on their cases in chief, or possibly maybe take them at the beginning of when the rebuttal hearing dates are set and set them aside for one of those dates at that point. But I did want to just lodge our concern and objection to not take them out of order where it would happen in the middle of our case in chief.
Thank you, Mr. Hitching. Mr. Boucher, please go ahead. You wanted to respond.
No, that's consistent with the conversations that we've had with respect to Dr. Rosenfield's testimony. He's unavailable from September 12th through about October 20th for pre-planned issues. And I am sensitive to Mr. Hitching's concern. I think if he told me he had a witness that he wanted to drop in the middle of the NGO group's case in chief, I would have the same reaction. So we may have to, I think some of this will depend on the rest of the scheduling conversation in terms of the total allotment of time, and then the schedule of additional case in chief days after October 10th, or like Mr. Hitching said, at the outset of the rebuttal testimony as case in chief evidence.
And that's the same. That's the same with regard to Dr. Herbold for Central and South Delta and San Joaquin County. That's fine as well. We'll work that out. We didn't expect to be right in the middle of the authorities' case in chief.
Thank you, and I really appreciate your professionalism in working out these issues. And I certainly will be flexible. You come to a solution that makes sense, we will work that out. So thank you for that. Mr. Hitchings, was there another issue, or so maybe a few issues?
Yeah, just a couple. Thank you. One was we just wanted to state our support and that we concur with. I think it was still a proposal, but it was a stated intention to use the chess clock approach for accounting for time, and the way that you doled out the number of hours for sites as the applicant and then across the protestants and the other interested parties. So we wanted to note our concurrence and support for that approach as set forth in the procedural ruling. And then kind of related to that is we'd request that if you could, and maybe you were planning to do this anyway, is just get some time estimates for the first couple of panels for the sites witnesses of what the estimated cross-examination time might be, just so we can address scheduling for the panels that follow. And I assume we'll kind of do that as we get through one or two of each panel, but we want to just make sure our witnesses are as up to speed on what dates we actually think they will be impaneled and need to give their live testimony.
I think that makes sense. The request for time estimates for cross-examination of the panels. And of course, and I would imagine this will go both ways. And then in response, we will eventually ask the same of you. So I think the protestants will have the same challenges with scheduling. Is there any concern from the protestants on providing some kind of estimate, and when could you do that with respect to the authorities' panels of witnesses?
I think it's perfectly appropriate to provide that. I would have to
think about it,
confer with the other folks in terms of the timing of doing it. I think certainly by, Friday or Monday. I don't know if that's, that's too much of a too far out, but I know I've got a kind of a busy schedule for the next few days, and I'll defer to others as well.
Yeah, so this, I have a busy schedule. I'm leaving for Boston with my daughter on Wednesday. I could go through it and by sometime next week make my estimates. But I think the bigger issue really is the time. We are there, so there's there are two. Mr. Ombar and myself are really concerned about flows through our property near College City and the water rights that go with that. And I think my issues, I have public trust issues, but also just water right issues. I don't, and then we're going to be relying on really time for cross-examination. And I don't see how, I don't see how we're going to be able to fit in with the 40 hours. I would think I need probably 8 hours myself for cross-examination and to make the one statement. I'm the only direct testimony is myself. And then the opening statement. So, we've appeared before the board twice. My grandmother in 1950 and 1952 regarding flows in the Coosa Trough, and then the water board, and also in 1983, then the Wallace Brothers decision made a determination on need for beneficial water flows for beneficial rights within the Coosa Basin drain. Those are all issues that I think I need time to on cross-examination and bring out. And also, I would just want to note, based off some of the policy statements today, especially Coosa County, I think people are confused about the conveyance part of the operations plan. 5 years ago, there was going to be a Delavan interconnect pipeline was going to go north of the Delavan Refuge, and now it's going to be done again. It has dramatic operation and environmental impacts, but also water right and property issues. So to bring that out, I'm estimating I'm going to need about 8 hours of time. And I imagine Mr. Ornbaum will feel like he probably needs about the same. And it's so having a chess clock type of methodology among all the different parties and many well represented parties here, and cross-examination, et cetera. I think it's going to be pretty much impossible to live within the 46 hours. And I would ask that probably myself and maybe Mr. Orbaum can chime in that we get a separate allocation or individually allocations to represent our case, because we really are not lawyers in litigation, at least, and then also we rely on cross-examination.
Thank you, Mr. King. So I'm noting down, I understand your concern about the time. One of the things that comes up with cross, and I recognize that you are in a different position than many of the other protesting parties here. Cross tends to cover a lot of the same ground, and that's what I want to avoid in cross-examination, although you may have different areas of interest than some of the other protesting parties. So I will take this under consideration, whether there should be a separate allocation for you and Mr. Ornbaum. I can understand you're in somewhat of a different position. What would be helpful would be to get, we're talking about this issue, is to get estimates of the amount of time that would be necessary or is requested, I should say, for cross-examination of each of the authorities' panels, and then eventually we'll get to the reverse. I think what I'd like to do, I mean, we know how we're proceeding, at least on our first day, which we'll hopefully get started on the first panel. I realize this will take some thought, and you may, probably are still reading testimony. If I can get estimates of the amount of time for cross-examination Mr. King and Mr. Ornbaum, you can do this separately. But then from the rest of the protesting parties, if you can at least coordinate, talk to each other. You don't necessarily have to combine, but coordinate so that we can total up what the request is for each of the authorities parties and get that into us by the end of the day on Monday, which should be the day before we convene. So Monday, the 26th. And I can get out a short instruction on this, but at the end of the day, Monday, the 26th, an estimate of time for cross-examination of each of the authorities panels. And I will ask for the same in response from the authority once we get closer to the protesting parties' witnesses. And that will help us for scheduling and planning. I'll start with Mr. Ornbaum because I saw your hand up first, and then I'll go to you, Mr. Busher.
Yeah, so you will provide us something that I'm gonna fill in, say how many cross-examined minutes I'll need, or I think I'll need.
I wasn't going to provide you anything, but we can look at it's based on what sites.
Okay, well, but on Monday, before Monday, I need to provide you with how many minutes of each person I wish to cross-examine.
For each panel. So the authority, and maybe one of you can help me, Mr. Hitchings or Mr. Ferguson, with the submittal from the authority that identifies the panels of witnesses that the authority plans to put on. Do you remember the date or approximate date of that submittal? Oh, I have it here. It's the July 29th statement from the Sites Project Authority, identifies that's for you, Mr. Ornbaum, July 29th statement from the Sites Project Authority identifies the panels in which they propose to put on their witnesses. So the idea is they would present these witnesses summaries of direct testimony, and then based on their, generally speaking, subject matter that they're addressing, those would be cross-examined as a panel. And the idea there is if you had a question, it may be that any one of the witnesses would be best to respond to that question, which is why we group them in that way. Does that make sense, Mr. Ornbaum?
Yes, I understand. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Busher.
Yeah, thank you. Just two clarification questions. One, you want the estimates by panel, not by witness on the panel, just the total time for the 3 or 4 or 5 witnesses. Okay, thank you. And number two, and this may be a better question for Mr. Hitchings, but are you planning to present the direct testimony from, right, if there's 4 witnesses on the panel, from all 4 of those witnesses kind of back to back to back? So that is, right, an hour and change of direct testimony for the panel, and then cross-examination as a panel, or witness by witness when you present them?
Yeah, my understanding was we would present the direct testimony for all the witnesses on the panel. So, whatever the summary takes for each one of them. And then once the last of that panel is done, turn over the entire panel for cross-examination at that point.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Mr. Mooney.
Yes. I just wanted to kind of follow up on what was discussed about the time limits, and that we have already informally sort of discussion among ourselves with regards to these time limits in terms of estimating time. So we've already kind of started that process. But I had this concern in the way the NGOs got included with Mr. King and Mr. Ornbaum, and as well as even with the county, is that and part of that is we have worked cooperatively among the NGOs in coordinating testimony and witnesses, so it's not overlapping, and have working together on with regards to cross-examination. My concern is while we can control our time, it's because of that cooperation, we have an idea of how much time it's going to take us in controlling our time. It seems unfair to us and to the other parties as well that we don't necessarily have control over how much time Mr. King, and I think if he needs that much time, he needs that much time. But we don't necessarily want to lose 10 hours of our time or 16 hours of our time because a party that has different interests from us, or as he said, indicated some different interests, has decided that he needs a lot of time. And even though maybe we try to work together on that, we end up being at the mercy of other folks. And Mr. King, I'm not trying to single you out or anything. It's just based upon what you said and such. And it just creates a concern, because if we have 46 hours and he's already told us he needs 16, or between the two, him and Mr. Ornbaum, they may need 16 hours. That leaves us 30 with respect to the county and the South Delta and the NGOs. So I'd like to see it broken out if we could. And I think we probably, as the NGOs here, there are a number of groups that I maybe we could provide an estimate of what we need as well by what we think we need.
Thank you, Mr. Mooney. And I understand where you're coming from on this, and frankly, I'm not surprised, and it makes some sense to me. From my position, I didn't break it out because we only have so much time to conduct this hearing. And I'm perfectly happy to break it out in the sense that I can include it in an order, but I'd much prefer that to come from all of you than for me to sit and try to allocate out that time. And so I prefer to hear from you on what you think is appropriate. So if there is a proposal, I guess what I would ask is that if you have a proposal, and particularly if it's on behalf of a joint and larger group, as to how that time should be broken out more specifically, please do submit it with the estimate of cross-examination time on the 26th. That would be quite helpful. You know how many days of hearing we have, right?
Well,
you can do the math.
Yeah, but does that mean that our proposal has to fit in within the 46 hour? I mean, so your order says NGOs, county, district, Mr. King, Mr. Ornbaum, 46 hours. So does that mean that whatever proposal we submit, splitting that up among those parties, has to add up to 46? Or are you willing to consider that we actually need more time?
I'm willing to we can look at that. Let's talk about it. I mean, keeping in mind we still have rebuttal, and I think inevitably rebuttal with respect to the ITP. I mean, we have a lot of process still to go here. But I'm open to, and I'm willing to consider a request for additional time, but within reason, right?
So, no, I understand that. Yeah. And
yeah.
And we don't want to be duplicative. And I think we've indicated we don't want to be duplicative just by the way the NGOs have already worked together in coordinating testimony and all. So, and we intend to continue to do that.
Thank you. No, I appreciate that. I'd like to go to Mr. Reese and then to you, Mr. Hitchings, if I may. But Mr. Mooney, is there anything else you'd like to add at this time on this issue? Okay, thank you. Mr. Reese.
Yeah, thank you. No, I shared Mr. Mooney's concern just in terms of if you would consider additional time, just in case we need it. Our particular focus is pretty focused, and we may have less time than people would expect because ours is pretty focused. But I don't want to run up against having that even squeezed because of what some other individuals like Mr. King and Ornbaum are in a different position, and they may end up, they haven't done this before, and they've got a lot of different issues, and we just don't want to have what we think is pretty specifically allocated time. We just don't want to have that squeezed further.
Thank you. Understood. Mr. Hitchings, please.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, the way we read your procedural ruling was that those were the proposed time limits, but they were subject to modification upon a showing of good cause. And it sounds like that's what you're asking for by Monday, is if there's a request to modify those, that state that request, but we would presume that that also would be accompanied with some sort of showing of good cause as to why it's needed. And that's the way that we had assumed that you were going to try to tackle this issue.
Thank you, Mr. Hitchings. I think that's right. Good cause in the sense of some reasons why to, particularly if we need an extension of time and additional hearing days. I will want to know why. I understand Mr. King and Mr. Ornbaum, you are not represented. This is a slightly different posture. I want to make sure that you have a fair opportunity to participate in this proceeding, even though you're not represented. So I will take that into consideration, but I would appreciate, and I will be looking for justification as to why, if there is a request to exceed in total 46 hours from the protestants, why that is and where that's coming from. Mr. Reese, are you, I don't know if your residual hand or you'd like to come back in.
Yeah, no, real quick question on this chess clock approach. Could you just, I'm not a chess player, but can you just, as far as evidentiary objections, that counts as part of the time as well? Could you just sort of walk me through that or walk us through that real quickly?
That is the way I'm proposing it as the chess punch the clock. What is it? Searching for Bobby Fischer, waiting for, it's a good movie. Then you'll know all about punching the clock. But it would include objections, motions, that kind of thing. The thing is where I'm looking at these hearing days and I'm in the position of having to manage this hearing and move through it efficiently and in an appropriate way. I have found in past proceedings, based on lessons learned, that sometimes attorneys, because they're doing a great job of representing their clients, like to take the opportunity to make long oral motions, and that takes a lot of our time as a result. So by applying these time limits, it's not that I want to stifle objections in any means. I just want to encourage efficient objections that we can work through in a timely manner without the opportunity for oral argument, if you will.
Thank you.
Well, the need for oral argument. I will accept things in writing as well. I think writing it's more convenient in many ways because it occurs outside of our limited time during the hearing days. Does that help?
Thank you. It does. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mr. King. You are on mute.
Yeah, I'm sorry about that. So first of all, I'd say Queen's Gambit. That's another use of chess clock time. So that's my favorite release. But one question, first of all, request, if I could have, I don't know if Tuesday's too late to submit go through everything and submit a request for time. I possibly can make Monday. I'm gonna be free on Saturday as I fly back, but depending on internet and stuff. So if you could let me know what my deadline is, I understand the good cause issue. And then the other question I had is for regarding statements made and cross-examination on the site visit, is that included in the overall time period? If you could just clarify that. Thank you.
Thank you. Those are both good questions. One, on the problem is Tuesday. I could give you Tuesday, but we're all going to be in a hearing all day on Tuesday. So I know what you'll be doing. I think maybe not, but the rest of us will be here. So it's I am going to stick with it. And by end of the day on Monday, I do mean, and hopefully you're not up until midnight doing this, but I do mean the full end of the day, so that we can have them at least in our inboxes when we start Monday morning. I'm sorry, Tuesday morning. I won't expect everyone to have read everything between midnight and 9 a.m. the next morning. But the idea would be we could address it possibly at the end of the day on Tuesday. With respect to the site visit, no, the site visit is the hours involved in and any testimony that occurs during the site visit days are not intended to be included within this time period. I did, however, indicate, and I continue to maintain that if parties testify during the site visit, and that should be very limited to pointing out physical locations and structures and things like that, that they would be subject to cross-examination. And I think that we would have to deal with as part of that chess clock time, because that is part of our hearing days, and that will take additional time. Does that address both of your questions, Mr. King?
So a statement made it would go against your time during the site visit, or just the cross-examination part?
Just the cross-examination, then that would be the cross-examination that would go against your time.
I see.
Not your
Okay.
time. So for example,
Right.
if you made a statement during the site visit
Yeah,
and then Mr. Ferguson opted to cross-examine you on that statement, that would count
Right.
against Mr. Ferguson's time.
Got it. Okay, very good. Thank you.
Thank you. And I didn't mean to pick on you, Mr. Ferguson, but you were there in my view. Are there other questions or comments with respect to time? I think what I'm asking for is by end of the day on Monday, the 26th, I would receive estimates of the time to cross-examine the authorities panels. And I would receive what I might call motions or requests to allocate the time between specific protestants in a little more specificity, as well as any requests for additional time. Does all of that make sense so far? Are there any questions? Is there anything else before we turn to the site visit? Mr. Ornbaum, I'll go to you first.
Well, when we do have cross-examination, is it a one-shot deal? We have questions to cross-examine, and an hour later, we have more questions if somebody has already testified. Do we get to call them again?
No, it is a one-shot deal, and that's inevitably how we have to structure it. Now, that said, this is case in chief. So if you have any questions about a party's testimony, which you haven't, you have all of it in advance now in writing, so you know what the party's testimony is. So that would be a basis for your questions. Typically, the way this works is that there's cross-examination, so all of the parties would have the opportunity to cross-examine the authority's witness as we go, if the authority is presenting their case in chief. Once that cross-examination is completed, the authority generally has the opportunity, if they want to, redirect their witness. So they may ask follow-up questions based on what was discussed during cross-examination. And then at that point, I ask if anyone has cross-examination questions based on that redirection. So it's like a funnel. We funnel down, it gets the scope of cross-examination gets narrower and narrower. But generally it's a one bite deal. Now, if you're working with other parties, and this is I guess I'll give you this hint. If you ask your questions and then later you come up with something and one of your fellow protestants is still cross-examining, maybe your fellow protestant will ask that question for you. That's always possible.
And then when I'm asking a panel, I'm asking the whole panel. Am I specific to my question to the person?
It's up to you. You could ask it of the panel. You could ask a particular witness on the panel.
If I ask one witness on the panel, I don't like the answer. Can I ask another witness, see what they came up with? If they're the ones that did the study, I'd like to understand how they came to the answer they have.
You may ask you may direct your question to specific witnesses on the panel, and you may ask the same question of multiple witnesses, although they may very well say, you know, this person was primary on this piece of the technical analysis or something like that.
Understood. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Ferguson.
Yeah, I wanted to raise a related issue, and that's evidentiary objections. I think you previously mentioned that there would be an opportunity to make evidentiary objections, and we would just like to request that you provide some further guidance so we understand the timing around which you'd expect us to file evidentiary objections. We assume that would be prior to or perhaps at the time the testimony is offered. But we'd just like further clarification if that's possible.
Sure. So, Mr. Ferguson, do you want to write? I'll ask you a follow-up question. Would you rather submit them orally or in writing? Do you have a preference?
I would say in writing.
Okay. I thought you might say that. Usually lawyers do, but that's so the problem with evidentiary objections in these types of, as you may know, but this just generally for everyone, generally evidentiary objections in our administrative proceedings generate a lot of time for a lot of people, myself included, but every party, you know, with the responses and things like that, and don't generate a lot of effect in a way, because the standards for admission of evidence in these types of proceedings are relatively low. The strict rules of evidence, as you know, don't apply. In general, hearsay comes in. There are some limitations. Hearsay objections are important. Those I think we can defer. What I've done in other proceedings that I think worked well was deferring hearsay objections until the end, and having those submitted in writing so that they're in the record. We can talk about in more detail maybe we can talk about it now in more detail about how to do that. In terms of scope, if there's particular evidence that you'd like to object, you seek to object to entirely remove it from the proceeding, that's more significant in the sense that if granted, that would be a matter of efficiency, right? It would save us time. On the other hand, those tend to be more involved. So, and then generally just for the lay of the land, what I would envision is that, for example, sites would present all of its witnesses, and then we would hear, you would move your evidence into the record at the end. So we'd go through however many days of hearing to go through the direct testimony and the cross-examination of all of the authority's case-in-chief witnesses. Then I would hear a motion to move their testimony and all of the associated exhibits into the evidentiary record, and we could deal with evidentiary objections at that, some of them at that time, some of them can be deferred to later. But if there are written evidentiary objections that go to the scope and really are important to be heard before we hear from the witness, because there may be an efficiency concern there, that is where I'm thinking we would want them before we hear from the witness. And I probably don't want to hear it, or if you're going to submit them in writing, it doesn't make sense for me to do it on the fly the day of us hearing from the witness, because I need an opportunity for the other party to respond. So with all that in mind, now I'm going to throw it back to you and say, do you have a proposal as to what you think the best way to handle this might be?
Well, I would suggest setting a deadline, maybe a number of days in advance of the testimony, the anticipated date of the testimony, so that you would have an opportunity to consider the objections in writing. I will say from the authority's perspective, it's a handful of pieces of testimony, and it really is focused around the scope, and in large part, they're the pieces of testimony that we are reading as legal argument, significant pieces of legal argument. And so it would be that sort of an objection that we would articulate in writing. I don't know how else to handle it in order to afford you the opportunity to review it. We're willing to make it orally too, but it does seem like it would be best to do it a bit in advance if we're talking about the substance.
Yeah, no, and it's helpful to have it in writing. I will say this is just an observation. Does not go to the merits of anything, and does not go to the merits in any way. My observation is I don't think I have ever excluded testimony because it constituted legal argument or legal opinion. Just as a note.
Okay.
And I'm, like I said, I'm not prejudging in any way. And part of that is because this is not before a jury, it's before me, and then I draft a recommended decision for the board members. So the chances of being persuaded by legal argument is less. Now, you may go to scope and say, well, this is not an efficient use of our hearing time. That's somewhat of a different type of argument, and that you may be making that. So I just wanted to note that.
Appreciate that.
Maybe I'll come back to you, Mr. Ferguson, but maybe I'll look to Mr. Mooney, because whatever conclusion we come to is going to apply equally both ways. So although the authority is putting on their witnesses first, so I realize this would mean that the protestants are on the spot for objections first, and that's coming up real fast. So Mr. Mooney, do you have a suggestion or a comment or
well, I would object to being let me rephrase this. I would object to having a deadline for that we have to file written objections and putting a deadline on that, given that their case in chief starts on Tuesday. And, we're going to have to be scrambling when the assumption has been, at least my practice before the board has been, objections like this are usually done orally and resolved at that point in time. And we've had all of these pre-hearing orders setting deadlines for everything, and then right before their case in chief to impose another deadline that we didn't anticipate. It just seems blatantly unfair, especially when their deadline would be essentially weeks out and our deadline would be days. So that's my thought. And my experience with it is that, you know, the hearing officer usually just, given that it's a different evidentiary standard, that when objections are made, and it's important to make objections, but oftentimes the ruling is that it goes to the weight of the evidence. And so I would kind of anticipate those types of rulings as well. And so in that sense, I don't think we need to have briefing on a whole variety of folks' testimony, just at this point in time.
So thank you, Mr. Mooney. I think this is helpful. Here's what I'm thinking, but I wasn't planning, I don't intend to impose a deadline for evidentiary objections in advance of the offer of the evidence into the record, where if you miss the deadline, you're done. You can't make the objection. We're not going to do that. I think the question, what I'm thinking of here is whether I will allow early evidentiary objections, so to speak, right, that are brought in advance of hearing the testimony. Do you have any comments on that issue?
Well, in terms of allowing evidentiary objections that are written versus just orally, I mean, I think we need to
either.
Yeah. Well, I think it's important. I think it's important to make oral objections to the evidence at the time, if we think that there's objections to it at the time, in a sense that, you know, your ruling and staff in reviewing it is, if it goes to the weight of the evidence, you know, you're considering it in light of that, I guess, at the time. So, but yeah, I don't think we should have a deadline for written objections. But if we're allowed to continue in terms of our closing brief or a separate objection to evidence at the end of the case, I would be fine with that.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Mooney. I'll turn to you, Mr. Reese, and then Mr. Ornbaum. I see your hand up. I will get to you as well. Thank you.
Yeah, I share the same concern, just in terms of how late we are in the process. Even if the authority, or if there's an ability to submit written objections in advance, practically speaking, because the authority's case starts, you know, a week from tomorrow, it's gonna be very difficult for any of us to prepare the type of written objections or the quality we want to put in it to get that done in time. So I think it should just be something that's submitted, you know, that it's a subsequent thing. It doesn't have to be, it shouldn't be now. And then if people are going to submit a written objection, usually there's an opportunity to submit a response to that, or a reply to that. And I just don't think there's time for that.
And Mr. Ornbaum, did you take down your hand? I see you took down your hand, and I'm going to, unless you raise it again, I'm going to assume that was on purpose. Mr. Mooney, I think you're next.
Well, I just hadn't taken my hand down.
I see. Mr. King.
Yes, this is sort of related. My question regards settlement discussions and any settlement proposals. I was informed by Sites Authority Council that I could not include that in the evidence regarding our settlement discussions and the proposal made. And I'm wondering if that's true, given that we're not. I understand there was a basis for rules of evidence, but I don't, as far as this proceeding. So I wonder if you give me some clarification on that.
Yes, I will in this instance, which generally speaking, settlement discussions and settlement proposals are confidential. They are confidential under the rules of evidence. There are certain rules related to that, but that is one of the few rules that does apply here, that those discussions should be maintained confidential and would not be appropriate to be included in the evidentiary record.
So just to be clear, I can't say this now. You know, so and so, you offered me this. Is that true? And I can't say that in the cross or so. If somebody actually, you know, offered to a certain recognition of a water right, I can't ask that question that was offered as part of a settlement. That's
I can't give you legal advice, Mr. King, but let me try to put bounds on that. If those conversations, if that information came up and those conversations occurred within the scope of a confidential settlement discussion, those would typically be excluded from both under the rules of evidence and from our evidentiary proceedings.
Okay, but the settlement discussions are considered confidential in this case, or?
Yes.
Okay.
Generally speaking, yes.
Okay, thank you.
All right, I'm thinking on the fly about the evidentiary objections issue. Maybe Mr. Hitchings or Mr. Ferguson, I'll turn back to you for if you have any additional thoughts on the most appropriate way to handle this. Do you have anything to add?
Well, we think there are certain efficiencies to be gained by advanced written objections, but we just would like some further direction on when the right, when you think the right time is to submit objections, and the authority can certainly work with it within whatever time and with whatever approach you conclude is appropriate. And I understand the protestants' concern about setting a deadline at this point, given the fact the authority is going first. So that does create certain challenges. We were just attempting to follow up on some of your statements in prior orders about addressing evidentiary objections, and just wanted some further guidance.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Maybe I'll turn back to Mr. Mooney and Mr. Reese, since you've chimed in on this issue. My question would be, do you think in other proceedings, the AHO and in other proceedings before the board, the hearing officers accepted evidentiary objections orally at the time the exhibits are offered into evidence, which they're being offered into evidence, that seems to be the last time for it, unless there's an explicit direction to defer the issue. For example, submit your hearsay objections later. I think we certainly would want to do that in this case. That's kind of a separate category of things. But do you have any objection, Mr. Mooney, and I'll ask you, Mr. Reese, to raising evidentiary objections orally at the time exhibits and including testimony are offered into evidence?
No, at this stage, I think that's when they should be offered. And
Okay.
in fact, in terms of creating, I'm gonna say, I think if the hearing officer allows written objections at this point in time, it actually puts on, say, the protestants' testimony, it actually puts us at a disadvantage, because I think it's been there was no provision in the hearing orders for written objections. And it's always been my understanding that the board usually does these orally. And so in terms of creating a record going forward, if one party is given the time and the opportunity to file written objections ahead of testimony, and the other party is not and other parties are not necessarily afforded that time and opportunity given the short time frame here, I think that ends it being an issue of fairness to the parties. So, and so in that sense, I would support oral objections.
Thank you, Mr. Mooney. And Mr. Reese, did you want to comment?
I agree with that.
Okay.
Yeah.
So here's what I would be inclined to do is that, keeping in mind these objections would count against the clock, that I'll accept oral objections, evidentiary objections during the hearing. Those can be raised either at the time the witness or in advance of the witness testimony, or at the latest when the witness's testimony or other exhibits are being offered into evidence. At that time, we may have some back and forth. If I think the objection merits written discussion, I may ask for written motions on the issue, but in that case, we could set the time limit so that they're fair, that they would go both ways fairly.
That works.
I think that's a good way to handle this. So I think with respect to your question, the authorities' questions, if there were objections that you wanted to raise to certain witnesses' testimony, you could do that earlier and orally. I'd first like to hear it orally in advance so we could talk about it and see if it merits something in writing. But you could do that in advance of the witness's testimony if you think it does go to scope and it may narrow the issues. I will go around the room. That's what I'm thinking right now. Mr. Mooney, did you have a thought or a comment on that?
I had a comment, but it's with regards to the chess clock. So
Okay.
in terms of how that's going to be monitored, and I'm going to phrase this in a way where I'm accusing myself of doing something and not opposing counsel, but say Mr. Ferguson makes an objection, and so that objection goes against his time, but I have a long-winded response to that objection. Does my long-winded response go against Mr. Ferguson's time, or does it go against my time? And I'm not suspecting anybody's going to do this necessarily intentionally on purpose.
Right.
But we have a clock.
It's a fair question. Yep.
And and we have people who like to talk and like to make sure they've covered all their points, for their clients. And so sometimes the response takes time. So I'm curious, does Mr. Ferguson, he gets dinged, 30 seconds for his objection, and I get dinged 10 minutes for my opposition, or vice versa. So,
well, I will say, I think that Mr. Ferguson won't be obliged to take on whatever time it takes for you to respond, so that won't count against Mr. Ferguson. I think that's clear. It's a good question. Frankly, I hadn't thought that piece of it through. Hopefully, it wouldn't. I'm counting all of you to be efficient with your response, and so I guess the short answer is at this point I don't know. I need to think about that, but I can clarify that for you once I have a chance to think about it.
Thank you.
I haven't done the chess clock approach before. I think we'll see how it works. I think it will be good, but I'll be honest, I haven't done it like this before. Are there other comments? And Mr. Hitchings or Mr. Ferguson, I just laid out this approach. Are there questions about it, comments about it? Did that clarify what my expectations are?
It does clarify it. Yep.
And I will attempt to write this down so that you don't have to go back to this Zoom well, we have a court reporter, but we don't have to try to figure out what I said. I will try to write it down to the best of my understanding. If there are further questions, we can address them on the 27th.
Okay.
Are there other issues before we move on to a discussion about the site visit?
I had one matter I did want to bring up again, and that was just with regards to the transcripts. We have had some discussion. I know, looking at the order, it's from July 1st, where it says if a party that cites an independently obtained transcript in the submission to the AHO will, however, be required to submit a complete transcript of the proceedings with that submission, which transcript will be made available to all parties at the time of the submission. It just seems like if the authority has indicated that they're going to have a transcript done, and I'm assuming they're going to use that transcript to provide, they're going to cite to that transcript in their closing briefs, or even maybe their objections. When we do, as we were just discussing, objections to evidentiary objections, and which, according to the order, would have to provide the transcript of the proceedings with that submission. It just seems to me that they should just be providing the transcript of the proceedings, in a more timely fashion. And again, we don't think that we should be the NGOs or the non-applicants should be forced to pay the bill of the transcripts. But since they are going to be part of the hearing record, they should be made available to us.
I will look, Mr. Hitchings, you're not Mr. Ferguson. Would you like to respond to that?
Yes, thank you. And I apologize for the technical difficulties. My laptop went on the fritz, so we are passing errands laptop back and forth.
No problem.
Yeah, we think that you got it right in your procedural ruling to, and maybe it was to balance in some ways that there are mutual benefits here. Sites agreed to take on 75%, but that was rejected. We're prepared to comply with the directive that you put in your procedural ruling. And if we do cite to the transcripts, then we will make them available at the time, both to the hearing officer and to all the parties. So we're prepared to comply with that directive, and we think that's appropriate.
Thank you, Mr. Hitchings. I'll comment on that. I don't see myself as having the authority to direct in any way a cost sharing on with respect to transcripts. I don't think I have the authority to do that. The direction with respect to the use of a transcript, of course, all of you are free to obtain and retain a court reporter and obtain a transcript. The direction to submit the transcript with any brief or motion that cites to the transcript is, of course, so that it's of assistance to the hearing officer and the board. And once it's part of our record, it's public. So it's going to be made public. I wanted to make that very clear. It becomes a public document and it's available to everyone, all the parties, and hopefully is an advantage to all the parties. It then becomes part of the administrative record. And then if and there was further litigation with respect to the board's final decision, then that transcript would then be part of the record, and we could actually all avoid the costs of having to obtain transcription services, which we've had to do in other proceedings before the AHO, where we have to actually then, after the fact, hire transcription services to transcribe the Zoom proceedings, which is extremely tedious and quite expensive. I realize court reporter services are not inexpensive anytime, but transcription is also not inexpensive. And then that becomes part of a cost of preparing the administrative record. That's how it's worked in other proceedings. So the position stated in the procedural ruling on July 1st was really intended to be a very neutral position. I don't think I have the capacity to step in and direct more clearly. I'm looking to all of you to work out an agreement that works for you. But once that transcript is cited to, it's made available in whole to the board. I don't want bits and pieces of a transcript that doesn't make sense. It's not so helpful that way. That would become available to all of the parties for their benefit. Mr. Mooney.
Yeah, could I ask for a clarification then on the
Sure.
order? When the order says the sites independently obtain time, or however, be required to submit a complete transcript of the proceedings with that submission. By proceedings, do you mean, are we talking, I'm reading that as the complete proceedings. Like if there's been 25 hearing days, that's transcripts of 25 hearing days, not just the excerpts from that witness.
That is what I intended. That's my understanding. Now, I don't want to get into in this hypothetical universe where, and I don't know that this makes sense, where the applicant would only hire a court reporter for part of the proceeding. I don't know. That's not a question I think that we have here. So I'm not going to opine on it. But yes, it was my intent that would be the full transcript, so that as you know, words matter in context and the larger picture. Yeah. And our Zoom transcripts, they're quite humorous, but they're not great for pinning down exact language. Are there other procedural matters we should talk about before we turn to the site visit? We have been going, well, we did get a 5-minute break, but maybe the site visit won't take long. So maybe I'll venture forth and avoid a break. With respect to the site visit, I don't have anything to add. My understanding is that, and I realized late that I hadn't issued a formal directive that you all meet and confer and submit something to me by the 23rd. I'd hinted at it by issuing a draft notice, but I realized I hadn't actually put that in a directive. So I apologize for not making that clear sooner. But my intent is that, and it's now been incorporated into that email procedural ruling, if you will, is that all of you will talk to each other and put together a joint proposal, and to the extent it's not agreed upon jointly, identify the areas of disagreement as to an itinerary for September 9th and 10th, and include, to the extent possible, some estimate of how much time you would like to take at each stop, so that we can get a sense of how the day would flow. I will add that it is the intent, just for your information, it is right now looking like a quorum of the board would like to attend the site visit, which does mean that it would be open to the public because of the transparency rules with respect to open meetings. So that's something to keep in mind. And it is our intent to record with we have a AHO GoPro that we will record the entirety. It won't be in quite as nice of a version, and it won't be live streamed on YouTube, but we will have recording of what happens on the site visit and everything that's said and formally. We would intend that everyone would provide their own transportation, and the members of the hearing team would be separated from others participating in that visit. But are there any questions or concerns with respect to the site visit, given that I'm hoping all of you are talking to each other and I, as I understand, have had some conversations, which I appreciate, with respect to an itinerary? Is there anything that I can add that would be helpful for your discussions in advance of submitting something this Friday? Mr. Ferguson.
Yeah, we have had discussions. We spoke as a group last week, and since that time, the authorities followed up with Mr. King and Mr. Ornbon because they had identified some sites that they felt are important. And I think we've honed in on what those additional sites would be. And my understanding is Mr. King, and we discussed access issues with Mr. King and Mr. Ornbon in particular, because some of the sites are on a levee and there's not, we understand DWR has an easement, but we need to understand the scope of that easement. And the last thing the authority wants to do is have anybody end up on private property. So we are working diligently to try to see if we can get to those sites that Mr. King has identified. And we'll continue to do that with the intent of submitting a complete proposal by the end of this week. And my takeaway from the call last week is that everybody was generally comfortable with the sites the authority had identified, and there was an interest in trying to get to the sites Mr. King had identified. So we will continue to do that and look at the timing for each of the stops we've identified and see how we can best allocate the time across the 2 days to try to reach all the stops, understanding that the days may be a bit long, but I think there was a general preference to visit as many of the sites as we can in 2 days, since everybody will already be in the area. So that's the authority's objective at this point, and we'll continue to work towards that and submit something to you jointly by this Friday. I would like to offer one more comment though, as it relates to a quorum of the board and perhaps making the meeting public. Some of these sites have limited access and they're restricted in some ways, and it could be an issue if we have, and I don't know what this number is, but too many vehicles show up at some of these sites because they have entry and exit points. The roads might be narrow, they may not be paved. I mean, they're passable, but we could be on levees. And they're proposing to be on the Colusa Basin Drain levee at certain points. And I just want to be clear that we could run into challenges if there are all of a sudden more cars than we're anticipating accommodating. So I will say we've already had conversations with Tehama-Colusa Canal Authority, GCID, RD 108. They're prepared to accommodate the tour group at their diversion points and along the drain. And so they're going to do their best to work with us and with the group to try to make everything go efficiently. But we just need to be prepared for restricted access at certain points. And I know it's hard to predict who else might show up once you make it a quote unquote public meeting of sorts. But I would just hate for folks to come out and then somehow be restricted or have certain sites held up because not everybody can get in and out of sites in a timely manner. So
thank you, Mr. Ferguson. I share I anticipated this might be a concern. And it's the balancing, of course, the board is, of course, very interested in this proceeding. So to the extent, maybe what might help me, and maybe what might help me might help you and all of us, is if it's possible to flag those areas where vehicle access or just number of people may be an issue on whatever you submit on Friday. If it doesn't have to be anything detailed or committing, just to identify them as limited access, potentially limited access sites. I think that would be helpful for me.
Okay, yeah, we will do that.
Okay, thank you. And I think another thing to think about when thinking about the itinerary, I think what we would want to do is meet, and you probably already have thought about this in more detail than I have, but meet at a location in the morning. We would have an initial meeting location, and then from there we would have a shared itinerary that we could then go through. So we would have some knowledge that morning, at least, if not sooner, of how large the group is, if that makes sense. We would have a central meeting location, and then we'd go from there. Not by central, I don't mean physically locate. I just meant a one stop where we could figure out how many of us there actually are. Ideally, we'll know within a ballpark well before September 9th, but we'll do our best to work this out within the constraints of the open meeting laws. So,
okay, then we will work towards identifying a location before the proposed first stops on each day to make sure that location can accommodate a group.
I think that would be very helpful.
Where we're rounding up folks.
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you. Ms. Dorman, thank you for your patience.
Hi, I just want to give an update to the very productive meeting we had on this topic the other day, which is that the Calusa Indians, they were not able to participate in the meeting where we all got together on the site visit itinerary, but it's my understanding that they do want to participate. And so they are awaiting the next draft of the run of show so that they can make a proposal as to when and where they would fit in. We requested at the beginning on their behalf that a placeholder space be considered for them, and they do want to participate. So their tribe, I know, is going to be meeting on this tomorrow. They are fully aware of the Friday deadline and have good intent to fit into the run of show. So I just wanted to give everyone that update, and am happy to facilitate the tribe coordinating with the authority and Allie and Mr. Ferguson, who are so kindly drafting the run show and helping to do the coordination.
Thank you, Ms. Dorman. I appreciate your comments. Just for clarification for our record, you're referring to participation in the site visit?
Yes, the site visit.
Wonderful. Thank you. And thank you for helping to connect Mr. Ferguson and the others at the authority with the tribe in this case. I appreciate that. So thank you for those conversations. Mr. Boucher.
I just had one question on the scheduling side. And I apologize if I just misread one of the updated notices or schedules, but it looked like the October 22 date that was being held as a potential day 3 site visit dropped off the calendar at some point. Is that, if we can't do this in 2 days, would that still be the subsequent date it would be available, or is that the date that we don't need to hold anymore?
Well, that's a good question. Thank you, Mr. Boucher. I don't think it dropped, or maybe if it did drop off, in some ways it was unintentional, but we hadn't talked about it. So it's sort of in the, like, evidentiary objections. Maybe it got away from us, but I think what makes sense is let me back up. When we initially talked about a site visit, I know there were some concerns that the specific timing of the visit will affect what you see, which often is true. I don't know that October 22nd is going to be much different than September 9th or 10th. Maybe different things happen in the fall. I'm aware of that. So that was one reason to hold it. Another reason possibly to hold it is if we can't get to all the sites that the parties agree are important in 2 days, and I'm willing to participate in a follow-up site visit for a third day if that's something that there's an interest for. So I think from my perspective, I'm continuing to hold October 22nd. And I'd be willing to entertain the idea that we should have a follow-up on that day with something more narrow, but that there should be a follow-up day. And if you have these conversations and it becomes clear to you, all of you, collectively, that it may be appropriate to go look at something in October, I'm open to that idea. Does that help? That's a little bit vague, but does that help?
It does. Thank you very much. And I'm cautiously optimistic from the conversation last week that we don't need 3 days to do the site visit that Mr. Ferguson and Mr. King were describing. But just wasn't. I appreciate the clarity on what the backup plan is for a third day if that becomes necessary.
Thank you, Mr. King.
First of all, I want to thank Mr. Ferguson and Ali regarding their discussions we had on Friday with Mr. Umbaum. I guess one thing I just want to point I want to make is that the area of the Cliffs Basin Drain next to my property and Mr. Ornbaum's residence and the College City area, we believe the reason why we're pushing for a site visit around that and the facilities around that, infrastructure around that, is because we believe it's unique, and also from both ecological point of view, but also how it restricts flows and the kind of diminution of flows over the time, important to this consideration, all the issues that you're considering for the assignment of it. The other is, I really do appreciate the issues of safety and property access. We are talking about a levee. I have reached out to the DWR, who controls the levee north of RD 108. But I still expect ambiguity, and from a safety point of view, I don't have a good answer about getting people out of their car and trying to talk on a levee. So it's work. I have some ideas how to work around that, and I do have access, property on both sides of the levee, at a certain part of it, and have I believe I have easements to that going back to the combination of that when the levee was built in the 1950s. So I'll make a proposal, and I'm not sure, but the bottom line is I'm not sure if we're gonna have a complete resolution of the property right issues, and I understand the safety issues. So I just want to say in that context, I hope to follow up by the end of the day or tomorrow with the authority regarding this to try to get this finalized by the end of the week.
Thank you, Mr. King. I know there's a lot coming into this hearing. I appreciate your efforts, and I understand that there may be areas that aren't completely resolved by the end of this week, and just identify those. And I think Mr. Ferguson will do a fine job on behalf of the authority identifying those areas so that we can, to the extent we need to revisit them, we can in advance of the site visit. I appreciate that. And I appreciate all of you talking with each other and working together. This is quite helpful, and I really do appreciate the effort to see the site. I haven't seen it, so I think that will be quite valuable to me. And the board members are very interested as well. And actually, many other members of the hearing team would like to see it. So we are all interested. Are there other issues about the site visit that we should talk about now? Well, I'll leave it at that. Are there other procedural issues that have now come to mind now that we did something else that we should talk about today before we adjourn for our first hearing day? Mr. King.
One last question. So when we filed our protests, for example, I included a bunch of exhibits and some photographs. Are they part of the overall exhibit record, or is it separate? How should we look at that? So if I want to bring up a photo that I submitted as part of my protest, but it's not identified in an exhibit index, is that allowable, or how do you look at that?
Generally speaking, any exhibits that you want in the evidentiary record would need to have been submitted either with your case in chief, which deadline has now passed. It can be if they're responsive to evidence that another party submits, that the authority submits in their case in chief, it's something that may be appropriate to submit in rebuttal. But even though it was attached to your protest, it doesn't automatically get offered into the evidentiary record. It's something that needs to be submitted with these case in chief exhibits, and then it would be could be offered and then accepted into the evidentiary record. Now, cross-examination is different. There are appropriate times, and I can't give you legal advice, but if you sought to cross-examine one of the authority's witnesses with respect to something in a document or a photograph, something like that, it may be appropriate to bring up that photograph, even though you had not submitted it with your case in chief exhibits. So this is where we get, it is a little bit, although the rules of evidence don't apply, this is sort of it's a rather formal process. So there are opportunities for that. Hopefully that helps. Does that help somewhat, Mr. King? You're on mute, so.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Are there other procedural issues for us to address today? Mr. Boucher.
Sorry, I have one last question. And just in terms of schedule for the evidentiary days, I assume we're starting at 9 and we'll go 9 to lunch with a break in the morning. And then do you have a sense for what the schedule will be for the afternoons? Is it kind of another 3-hour block with a break in the middle, or?
Roughly, so I will try to, as I indicated earlier today, I will try to do, not try, there will be, for our regular hearing days, not the site visit, but our regular hearing days, unless we flagged it in advance, there's going to be a hard stop at 5 p.m. I know many people have particularly childcare, but you could have other obligations. So I do hold us to that. We're all going to spend a lot of time together, and I want to make sure to respect the rest of your life. So hopefully you don't have work meetings at 5 p.m., but you can schedule them. I will hold a hard stop. In terms of breaks, generally I'll go an hour and a half, 2 hours, take a break. If a witness needs a break, I mean, witnesses generally don't like to go more than an hour and a half. That's more than a little grueling. So I try to be humane, allow for breaks, 10-minute break here and there. Generally speaking, I mean, I know we're tight. So we may just do 45 minutes for lunches, but generally speaking, I've done an hour for lunch, often because there are things for all of us to be doing in that hour. I'm looking at some objection, you're looking at an objection, you know, what it is that with their working lunches, and that hour is well spent. So I will try to keep us to an hour lunch, because I know you need time to actually eat, and you often need time to talk to each other. And I need time to talk to my team. So that is generally the lay of how I've run things, but it may be that some days we'll do, 45 minutes, something like that. But I'm not going to jam us into a half-hour lunch. I think in the long run, it doesn't get us ahead very far. Does that help?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Are there any other issues that we should be addressing today? All right, I think with that, we can adjourn for the day. I do want to thank all of you for your time. I know it was a long day and we had some technical difficulties in the morning. I really appreciate your professionalism, your time as we go through the last push to get this hearing going. I look forward to hearing from you about the site visit, and then also about timing for the hearing. And I will see you, hopefully some of you in person, on August 27th, and we will have some of our technical difficulties worked out. So with that, we are adjourned.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye. I talked to Patrick about this. This started popping up yesterday. I can't, every time I try to clear it, it just keeps popping.